So Rambam says, Halacha Yot Beth, which is Halacha Yot Tef, Madrat Machon Mamre. בזמן שאדם מתבונן בדברים אלו, הוא מכיר כל הבירואים, ממלאך וגלגל ואדם וכיוצא בו. הוא יראה חוכמתו של הקודש ברוך הוא, בכל היצורים, בכל הבירואים. When a person is capable of investigating and understanding some of these things, which is also mentioned, if you recall, at the beginning of Perek Beth. Rambam said at the beginning of Perek Sheni, the very beginning, Ha'el hanichbad v'hanura hazeh, this creator, the source of all existence, that was described in the previous chapter, in the first chapter. Miswa la'ahavo u'lir'am himenu. It is a miswa min HaTorah, to love him and to fear him. Shene'emar v'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha. That's with regards to ahava. V'ne'emar et Adonai Elohecha tira. Two separate pesukim, two separate miswot. And then he goes. And then he goes on to say, how does one achieve this? When a person takes note, hitbonen is not just to see, it is to investigate and to inquire and reach a true and profound understanding. So, when a person begins to take note and understands more about the majesty and the mystery of creation, of the created universe, and thus the person begins to understand, and the more he looks into these things, the more he understands the wisdom, the chokhmah that underpins all of it, all that he sees, which is beyond imagining. Miyad hu ohev u'meshabeach u'mefa'er u'mitaweh ta'ava gadola. Immediately, a person is moved to love, to praise, to glorify Hashem, and has a tremendous, a person will find within themselves a tremendous desire. Mitaweh ta'ava gadola leda Hashem agadol, to know this Creator. Kamo she'amar David, Sama'a nafshi le'Elohim le'Elhai. The person will discover within him, as David HaMelech says, a great thirst. Elsewhere, perhaps we'll look at this another time, the Rambam also discusses how, in addition to what he just wrote here, and what we're about to return to in Perek Daled in a moment, Rambam also mentions in a couple of places that by investigating, excuse me, by looking into and understanding the chokhmah behind the miswot, the purpose of the miswot and the actual practice of the miswot, this also brings about ahava and yirah. We'll look at that another time. So we return to Perek Daled, and Rambam says here, Again, we read Halacha Yudbeth or Yudtef, Bizman she'adam yitbonen b'dvarim elu, u'makir kol haberuim mimalach v'galgal v'adam v'chayotze bo. When a person takes in all the various levels of the created universe, Rambam speaks here about malach, about angels, about galgalim, which basically takes us back to a discussion of astronomy, the workings of the heavens, Adam and human beings, and everything that we are able to know about them. And takes note, therefore, and begins to understand more and more about the wisdom of Hashem and the tremendous chokhmah, which is beyond description. Again, underpinning all of this creation. Musif ahava ala maqam. A person will find within himself a love of Hashem. With isma nafsho. This again goes back to what we just read, the pasuk that was quoted at the beginning of Perek Bet. With isma nafsho, his soul will thirst. V'yichmah basaro. His literally his flesh, his very being will yearn. Le'ahov hamakom baruch hu, to love Hashem. Hamakom baruch hu is a reference to Hashem. This is in fact this terminology hamakom baruch hu or hamakom is one of the more ancient terminologies used to refer to Hashem. In a number of places, by the way, the term hamakom, which is a more ancient term, was replaced in some texts by another terminology, such as Kodesh Baruch Hu or something, or Kadosh Baruch Hu, which is, it seems, Bichlal not very correct terminology. Kadosh Baruch Hu, if anything, Kodesh Baruch Hu, which is more ancient and more precise, or just Kodesh, which we find in various places, such as in Torah Kohanim, Sifra, in Masechet Makoth, for example. Rabbi Hananya, the last Mishneh, in the last halacha in Masechet Makoth in the Mishneh, Rabbi Hananya ben Akashya Omer. You probably heard this, it's familiar, well known, oft repeated Mishnah. Rasa, it says here, I'm looking at the text in front of me. This is in fact on the Machon Shilo site. Rasa Kadosh Baruch Hu, it says here, Lezakot at Israel, to add to their merit and to their ability to come close to Him. Therefore, lefichach hirba lahem Torah u'mitzvot. Therefore, He commanded them much Torah and many mitzvot. Shene'emar Adonai hafez l'ma'an tzidko yagdil Torah v'yadil. Right? You're familiar with this halacha. So, in most texts, as I recall, let's see if I'm mistaken or whether I remember correctly. I will look it up now in the more accurate versions of the Mishnah. As I recall, the other text is slightly different. For instance, in Ketav Yad Kaufman, the Kaufman manuscript of the Mishnah, which seems the most ancient and most authentic that we have, the text reads, Rabbi Hananya ben Akashya Omer, Rasa HaMakom Baruch Hu, Lezakot at Israel, Lefichach Hirba Lahem Torah Mitzvot. That's the original Girsa. So I recall it's not just in Machon, in Kitav Yad Kaufman. I think it is also other in Kitav Yad Parma also. Let me double check. Yes, in Kitav Yad Parma also, which is I think the second most accurate and precise, sometimes even more precise, I think, than more correct than Kitav Yad Kaufman, but usually it's the other way around. It also says, Rabbi Hanayel ben Akashya Omer Rasaha Maqom Baruchu Zakot Israel. This is the very ancient terminology, authentic and precise terminology, which, as you see, was sometimes, for various reasons, the term HaKadosh Baruch Hu became more popular, and it was replaced by the Soferim, by the copyists, which is not a good practice. It's not a good idea to decide what the text should read because you like that particular turn of phrase or what have you. That's not the way these things should work, but unfortunately, frequently they did work in that way. All right, so we return to Rambam's Mishneh Torah. Kayadua Rabbeinu Tam announced the herem, a very serious halachic concept, a herem, on any copyist who would change the text that he was copying, even if he thought it was definitely wrong, that he shouldn't touch it, because frequently the Soferim did not understand, and what they thought was incorrect was actually extremely correct and ancient and precise. And by once you copy it differently, and that gets copied further by others, the ancient girasa can be lost forever. It's something that is can be irreversible, tremendous loss. So we have to be careful about very, very particular about such things. Very well. Rambam says a person will find within himself this tremendous love and thirst, love for Hashem and a thirst for Hashem, a yearning. We've had mishiflutho, withalutho, v'kalutho, and a person will begin to recognize his own first of all, he will begin also to fear Hashem. Yira'ah we've had. And also he begins to take note of his shiflutho, his own lowliness, withalutho, how small, how lacking in so many things, so many qualities and capabilities person discovers within himself, withalutho, v'kalutho. When he compares, if he compares himself to much more majestic and impressive aspects of creation, how much more so if he compares himself to spiritual beings such as angels, etc., as was discussed in an earlier chapter, that have no physical form, that have no physical form whatever. He will begin to view himself as a vessel full of shame. Rek u'haser, empty and wanting. Now you may ask, in that case, we would imagine that all people involved in scientific endeavor would be the most religious and most spiritual and most humble of people. And we see this is not the case. That is not because there are no such scientists out there. There are quite a few, in fact. But it is also true that many are not. It's probably fair to say most of them are not nowadays, and for some time, not just today. And therefore, how can the Rambam say that the more a person understands and investigates and perceives the various aspects of creation, the greatness of he who created these things, and all things, and including himself, how can a person not be so moved and impressed? The answer is that if a person exists, if his life is based on a natural, intuitive appreciation of life, of the world around him, of creation, this will be his response. This will be his natural, intuitive response. It will well up within him without any effort. However, if a person's mind and soul are poisoned essentially by a radical and uncompromising ideology that insists that there is no creator and there is no what you perceive as greatness or majesty or wonder in creation is just your subjective human perspective. You're imposing your human perspective on inanimate and undirected material processes. That's what some of these people will claim. And when you see synchronicity and conjunction of events and realities in the world about us, both in the past and the present, again, some people will say you are just imposing your subjective human perspective on a universe which doesn't know or care about your perspective at all. Just you interpret it this way, but it has nothing to do with the reality, with the objective reality. And the main thing is the insistence, and that's what it is. It's not even a belief, it's an insistence. No matter what, there cannot be a creator. Why not? Because we just don't like that idea. It's like a certain sofer not liking or not understanding the terminology Machon Baruch Hu, so I'll switch it for Kadosh Baruch Hu because I've heard that term before, it makes more sense. So let's just switch it. So some scientists are very, very insistent, but really it's a belief system like any other belief system. Even in fact, I would say less than most belief systems, because as has been discovered increasingly over the last couple of generations by scientists, some of whom did not begin at all with this perspective, it has been discovered increasingly that mechanistic, materialistic processes, undirected processes, cannot really explain the world that we see, certainly not the reality of life, even from the single cell level and up to the human being. It simply doesn't work from a purely scientific perspective. I think I mentioned in the past certain he's both a philosopher and a biologist, I think, is the field. I think that's how it would be described. I think his name is Stephen Meyer. He wrote a number of books. One of them is called Darwin's Doubt. Another one is called The Return of the God Hypothesis. There's a third one, which escapes me right now, that I'm aware of anyway. He summarizes, I think, very, very well and convincingly the scientific basis for and philosophical basis for claiming that the hypothesis, if you want to call it that there is a creator who brought about these processes, biological processes, life, and how organisms develop, etc. These things are more readily explained from a purely scientific and philosophical perspective by assuming that there is a primal cause to these things, rather than any other explanation. That is something that some people will admit to and others will not admit to, because it just doesn't fit the party line. Very well, we continue. So the things discussed in these 4 chapters that we have covered, related to these 5 mitzvot, the 5 mitzvot he refers to are at the beginning of Yesodei Torah. To know that there is a God, a creator. Not to imagine there is any other than that one creator. And therefore to affirm his oneness. To love him, and to fear him. Those are the 5 mitzvot he refers to. Hem shehachamim horishonim koreim oto pardes. It is this that Hachamim referred to sometimes by using the term pardes, which literally means some kind of orchard, or even more like a specially planted and maintained and cultivated a garden of some kind. As Chazal mentioned in Masechet Harira, that various Chachamim entered the Pardes, in other words, studied these matters in great depth. And even though they were great Chachamim, amongst the greatest of the Chachamim in Am Yisrael, לא כולם היה בהן כוח לדע ולהסיר כל הדברים על בוריין. Not all of them were able to perceive and understand correctly these various matters. In other words, just as in the physical realm, in order to I could say run a marathon, but not just a marathon, just to run a race of almost any kind, shall we say, without training for it very diligently beforehand, so that your body, your muscles, your respiratory system are up to it. Even if you are able to run the race, you will suffer very, very sore muscles and etc. for quite some time, because you're not ready for this, or more likely you won't even be able to complete the race. A person who hasn't trained for a marathon is unlikely to complete a marathon. In the same way, when it comes to spiritual and intellectual endeavors, a person has to prepare oneself in a measured and well planned manner before trying to understand all of these things. And therefore Rambam says, the next halakha, the last halakha in this parak, وَأَنِي أُمِرْ, therefore I say, שאין ראוי לטייל בפרדס, אלא מי שנתמלא כרסו לחם ובשר. It's not correct for people who have not studied the more mundane and technical aspects of the Torah for quite some time. It is not proper for such people to try and enter the Pardes. Rambam explains, what are we talking about? Bread and Shenit Malek Reso Lehem Uvasar, bread and meat. Lehem Uvasar, Rambam says, Hu Leda, to know, Beur Ha'asur, Bahamutar, to know that which is asur, that which is mutar, permissible and forbidden, Bahem, Misha'ar HaMiswath. In other words, to know first the basic pshat, the basic understanding and parameters of the Torah, what a person is supposed to do, what a person is not supposed to do, because these things create a balanced, healthy individual. This living according to the Torah will also train a person to control his various urges, instincts, desires, and thus increase his spiritual and intellectual capacity. And this is one of the reasons why the world today looks as it does, because so many people have been brought up to think that there is no need to control their desires, their inclinations in almost any area of human existence, and therefore the physical aspects of life crowd out everything else and drown out the voice, as it were, of the spiritual, so it cannot be heard. ואף על פי, says Rambam, שדברים אלו דבר קטון קראו אותם חכמים, as is mentioned in the Talmud, that the study of the Mishneh, the Talmud, the discussions of the Talmud known here or mentioned there as Havayot D'Abaye Rava, they're referred to as a davar katon, as something small compared to Ma'aseh Merkava, Ma'aseh Bereshith. That is true. Nevertheless, Afal Pichen, Ru'im Hem L'Hakdimam, they must come first. There must be a certain order and regimen to the study of Torah and spiritual matters. And the davar katan comes before the davar gadol. Shehem miyashivim da'ato shel adam tehila. As we said, this causes a person to be balanced, to be rooted, to be healthy. Miyashivim da'ato shel adam literally means that it settles the mind, and it causes a person to be able to perceive things correctly. And further, Shehen HaTorah HaGadola Shehishpi'a HaKodesh Baruch Hu Liyishuv HaOlam. They, that is to say, the Misvot, the Torah and the Misvot, the instruction that the Torah and the Misvot provide for us, Hem HaTorah HaGadola Shehishpi'a HaKodesh Baruch Hu Liyishuv HaOlam. They are a essential and almost beyond our understanding how great a gift they are to the world, to us, for the world to run and to exist in a proper fashion. So these things are Tovah HaGadolah Shehishbiah HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yishuv HaOlam, for literally the settling of the earth, so that human beings may exist in a decent, normal society, more or less the opposite of what we find around us today. In order to be able to merit and to inherit Olam Haba, the world to come, where and a person can know them. It is possible for people to study the Torah, these things. Great and simple people, Ish wa Isha, men and women, Ba'al Lev Rahav, Uva'al Lev Qasar, a person of great understanding and perception, and a person with much less. The Torah can be understood and must be learned by all, each in his own way, according to his own capabilities. And this creates a healthy, functional society. And that is a basic requirement for human beings to truly develop their talents and their abilities. If you are constantly bombarded by inane advertisements and truly unhealthy, pernicious ideologies and notions, this can cause a person to go into a kind of tailspin spiritually, ideologically, as we see around us today, quite literally. A world in which teachers encourage 12-year-olds to undergo sex change operations, for example. This is just one example of complete insanity, having overrun much of the Western world as we know it today. And I have no doubt things will become worse before they become better. Very well. Perek Hamishi. This is now the sixth mitzvah that Rambam lists at the beginning of Hilchot Yesodei Torah. The sixth mitzvah is Lekadesh Shemo, to sanctify Hashem's name, and the seventh Zayin is Shelo Lehalel et Shemo, not to desecrate His name. And Heth, number 8, is Shelo La'abed Devarim Shenikra Shemo Alehem, not to destroy things, objects, items which are connected to Hashem, which where Hashem's name appears, etc., as we shall see presently. So Rambam says, Kol Beth Yisrael Mitzuim al Kiddush Hashem HaGadol Hazeh. All of Am Yisrael are commanded to sanctify this great name, in the words Hashem. Shene'emar v'nikdashti b'toch b'nei Yisrael. I will be sanctified among the Jewish people, within the Jewish people. Umuzharim shelo lahalalo, and we are also commanded not to desecrate His name. Shene'emar v'lo tahalalu et Shem Chodshi. All right, so what does that mean? How does one sanctify Hashem's name? When, in which situation are we commanded to do, and what are we commanded to do, and what are we must we not do? This miswa, as we're about to see, particularly refers to action or inaction in the public domain. In other words, doing things or not doing things in the presence of others, as we're about to see. Kesad b'sha'a she'ya'amod goy v'yanoset Yisrael. So, for example, if a Gentile wishes to force a Jew, la'avor ala hat mikol misvot ha'amurot b'Torah, or yihadchenu, if he threatens him with death, if he will not transgress one of the misvot of the Torah, ya'avor v'al yiharech, the Jew, in response to this terrible, lamentable situation, ya'avor v'al yiharech, he should transgress that particular sin, and rather than be killed. Shene'emar b'misvot, because it says in the Torah, Asher ya'aseh otam ha'adam v'hai b'hem. It says in the pasuk that Hashem gave the Torah and misvot, Asher ya'aseh otam ha'adam v'hai b'hem, that a person shall do them and live by them. V'lo, and Chazal Doresh explained, V'lo she'yamut b'hem. Yeah, the idea is that it should be musif hayim, it should add to our lives, not detract from them. Even more than this, says Rambam, if a person nevertheless allowed himself to be killed rather than transgress, he will be punished for as it were, making light of his own life. In other words, it's not always the right answer, it's not always martyrdom. Depends, as we're about to see. When is this the case? This refers to misvot in general. However, there are exceptions. With the exception of literally foreign worship, often translated as idol worship, but I would say that is not precise. And forbidden sexual activities, and bloodshed. These three are an exception. If he's told you must do one of these things or you will be killed, he should choose death rather than transgress one of these things. Rambam continues. This is Halakha Gimel. Here is Beth. Stein. This is the case that one should rather transgress than be put to death with regards to all the misvot except for these three. This is true when the Gentile in question says this, demands this of the Jew for his own personal reasons. He wants someone to cook him a meal on Shabbat. So he says, you go over there and cook this, make me a stew. He's only doing it because he wants a stew. He doesn't really care if the Jew keeps Shabbat or not. For example, he forces a Jew to build his home for him on Shabbat, or to cook for him. Or anas isha v'alah or he this Gentile wishes to rape a Jewish woman, which, as discussed elsewhere in Rambam, as we can look it up, this is not considered gilui arayot. If a non-Jew forces himself on a woman, that is not considered gilui arayot. So if that is his intention, then that halakha, as we stated, it is correct. However, but in fact, if his intention was specifically to cause the Jews to transgress the Torah, if he was alone, they were not. And what is that? What does it mean to be alone? The smallest body of people that is counted as a tzibur, as a public, as it were, in the public to be. That's the public domain. Shutha Rabim is when you have 10 people. Ya'avor wa harev. If this is not in public, you should rather transgress and then be put to death. But if the intention of this Gentile was to force the Jew to transgress the Torah, and this was being done in public, and if it's being done in public, it's being done in public for a reason. The Gentile wants other Jews to see this. He wants to break their spirit. He's waging psychological and spiritual warfare on the Jewish people. That's what he's doing. Therefore, it is better that he allow himself to be. It is better and he's required to be put to death rather than transgress. Even if the miswa in question is not one of the three that we mentioned earlier, but any of the miswot. If it is being done with that intention and is being done in public, it is then yarev wa ya'avor. You should rather be put to death than you should then transgress, because by doing so, what we are essentially collaborating with this evil person to uproot the Torah from Israel, and this is what is required of any Jew, not just of a great, famous, learned scholar or something. Any Jew is all, as Rambam said, Kol Bet Yisrael Musawim al Kiddush Hashem Agadol at the beginning of this chapter. And Rambam writes in Sefer Miswot, where he discusses this, Miswot Aset Tait, he writes there that the aim of this miswah is Sha'anu Musawim Lefarsem Dat Ha'emath Hazor Barabim. We are required, we are commanded to make known, to advertise, to disseminate knowledge of this Torah, Barabim, in public. And that we should not be afraid to do so. Rambam continues. Halakha Gimel here. Or Daled. All that we have just said, this is true when there is no shemad. What is shemad? Shemad refers to an official government policy to uproot the Torah or aspects of the Torah. That is called Sha'at HaShemad. Avar b'Sha'at HaShemad, but when this is the case, who, such as Sheyamod Melech Rasha, an evil king, literally, arises, such as Nebuchadnezzar wa Havero, such as Nebuchadnezzar, who was the first example that we see in the Tanakh, who tried to force Jews to worship Avodah Zarah, for example. And when Rambam says here Havero, his associates, he's probably referring to many other kings and regimes that came later, similar to him. V'yichzor shemad al Yisrael, levatel datha, and decrees that it is now forbidden for Jews to study Torah, to keep the Torah, to teach Torah, what have you. Levatel datha, in order to nullify and eradicate their Torah. or miswa min miswa, or even one of the miswa. Yahareg wali avor. A person should rather be put to death rather than transgress and again participate and collaborate in such a plan. Afilu ala hath mishal miswa. Even for any of the miswa. Ben na'nas b'toch asara, ben na'nas beno leben goyim, whether this is taking place in a public setting where others will see it, or not, even if he's alone. In other words, b'sha'at ha'shemad, every action, everything that a person does or does not do is as if it's been done in public. Because the government policy, the design of our enemies to undo the Torah, to cause it to cause the Jewish people to be torn away from their Torah. When this is a clear, distinct policy that is being enforced, then every such case of enforcement is an act of shemad and is an act of eradication of the Torah, and therefore we are musawim, we are commanded not to in any way go along with this policy. Rambam adds, Dalid or Hey, Kol mi shene'emar bo ya'avor v'al yahareg. In any of the cases we mentioned, where the halacha is ya'avor v'al yahareg, that the person should transgress rather than be killed. When a harag v'lo avar, and he nevertheless chose to be killed rather than transgress, hare zeh mithayev b'nafsho. Such a person is responsible for his own death. It's similar to committing suicide. And the opposite is also true. Anyone who should have rather given up his own life rather than transgress the Torah in one of those situations, in other words, if it's in public, if it's Shat HaShemad, if this was done in front of 10 or more Jews, if he allowed himself to be put to death, such a person performed the miswa, very unique, terrible miswa in some ways, of Kiddush Hashem barabim, Kiddush Hashem barabim, Kedaniel, Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah. Those people mentioned in Sefer Daniel, that Nebuchadnezzar wished to force them to worship Avodah Zarah, and they would not. Rabbi Akiva Havera, and also other examples we have, such as Rabbi Akiva, who, as we know, taught Torah Barabim in public to large numbers of Jews, even though there was an explicit decree by the Romans not to do so. But because Rabbi Akiva and his followers and other Chachamim understood that, as it says in the Midrash, that the Jewish people without Torah are like fish out of water. That in itself is their destruction, and nothing could be worse. Such people are known as Harugei Malchut, people who are put to death by the authorities because of their desire to follow the Torah, to live according to Hashem, according to Hashem's dictates and express will. Elohim Harugei Malchut she'en ma'ala al ma'alatham, who are considered to be on the highest level because they were willing to lay down their lives for Hashem and His Torah, and for the continuation of the Torah, the continued existence of the Torah in Am Yisrael. وعليهم نأمار, and it speaks about such people in Tehillim, Ki alecha haragnu kol hayom. For you we have been killed in other words, all the time, frequently. Like sheep led to the slaughter. In other words, in certain situations, that is how we have behaved, that is what we do. And about such people it states, also in Tehillim, Isfu li hasidai, gather unto me my pious ones, literally, those who fear me. Those who uphold my berith, my covenant with Am Yisrael, alei zavah. That's not the pshat of the pasuk, but it fits the drasha very beautifully. The alei zavah, in other words, even though they are slaughtered themselves for this, as if they were a zevah, a korban, gather them unto me because they are very close and special to me. I think we shall stop here.
Thank you, Rabbi Bar-Hayim. We would like to encourage our viewers to share these videos with friends and send in your responses. We would also like to suggest the following opportunity to our viewers. If you identify with Rabbi Bar-Hayim's message and would like to sponsor or dedicate a video interview with the rabbi in honor or memory of a loved one, if you would like to obtain Birkon Nusach Eretz Yisrael or invite the rabbi for a speaking engagement, please email us at office@machonshilo.org. If you are inspired by Rabbi Bar-Hayim's message and would like to get involved in Torah Eretz Yisrael activities in your local area, please fill out the relevant form by going to the link which appears on the screen.